morning, good evening, esteemed guests, dear colleagues, organizing and oversight committee members. Welcome to the webinar on COVID-19, US, Arab, and Global Perspectives, a joint partnership between the US National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine and Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. I'm Dalal Najib, and I'm the Director for Science, Engineering, and Capacity Development at the US National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. This webinar is part of the Arab American Frontiers of Science, Engineering, and Medicine program. Before moving on to the main topic of the webinar, we will take a few minutes to introduce the Arab American Frontiers program to you, as well as the upcoming symposium held in partnership with Hamad bin Khalifa University next year in 2021. Next slides. Thank you. So the program was based on the long-standing Frontiers of Science and Frontiers of Engineering programs that convene outstanding early to mid-career researchers in a unique interdisciplinary setting, challenging them to broaden their horizon and include methodologies and techniques of other disciplines into their own. Since the 90s, we have had bilateral programs with Germany, China, Japan, the European Union, Korea, India, and others. However, there was no program at the time with the Arab region. The program, the Arab American Frontiers program, was launched in 2011. It came a couple of years after President Obama gave his famous Cairo speech calling for a new beginning for US-Arab relations and branding science as an effective vehicle for people-to-people exchange. As such, Arab American Frontiers Symposia convene every year over 100 outstanding researchers between 30 and 45 years old from the US and 22 countries of the Arab region to discuss novel advances in science, engineering, and medicine. The objectives of the program are threefold. First, knowledge exchange on cutting-edge scientific issues. Second, fostering scientific collaborations between US and Arab researchers, but also among Arab researchers. And last but not least, provide a professional development opportunity through service in the organizing committee, the fellowships program, and others. As you can see in this map, we have held 7 symposia all over the Arab region, from Kuwait to Morocco, passing by Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt. These meetings have tackled a wide range of topics of direct relevance to the Arab region and the United States. For example, renewable energy, artificial intelligence, precision medicine, food security, water desalination, infectious disease, to cite a few. After each symposium, if a pair of participants has identified a common area of research interest, they can apply for a fellowship or travel grant to visit each other's institutions. These visits are often an opportunity to meet with the broader research group, take a deeper dive into research questions, prepare joint publications or joint proposals, initiate institutional MOUs, and in some cases, the fellows take also their students along. The outcomes of the program have exceeded our expectations and are a testament to its success. We have a vibrant alumni community of over 700 US and Arab young researchers who are connected and committed to collaborative research. Over 65 fellowships have been awarded so far. While initially most of the fellowships were Arab researchers going to the US, most recently we have witnessed a reversal of the trend, as 60% of our fellows are US researchers who are visiting Arab centers of excellence. Over 30% of our participants are women, and we often conduct capacity building workshops before or after the event on, for example, proposal grant writing, science communication, or technology commercialization. And our alumni have issued joint publications in peer-reviewed journals, applied successfully for research grants to US government and international organizations, and initiated student exchange programs. This program initially taps into current funding opportunities, and it's supported by our main partner, Hamad bin Khalifa University, for the next year's symposium, but also from USAID and the National Science Foundation, NSF. Speaking of the next symposium, I would like to welcome our committee co-chairs, Professor Dina Athani and Professor Leonard Pease. Let's start with Dina. So Dr. Dina Athani is currently an assistant professor and the director of interdisciplinary programs at the College of Science and Engineering at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Her research areas of interest are inclusive design, accessibility, and designing for e-health. She's keen to see the impact of her research on assistive technology research in Qatar and in the world. She's a part-time consultant for research and innovation at the MEDA Assistive Technology Center, where she works with the innovation team. She has been leading the National Academy HBKU partnership on the Qatari side. The US co-chair is Professor Leonard Pease, who's a senior researcher at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, PNNL. He has held academic appointments in internal medicine, chemical engineering, and Asian studies. At PNNL, he leads, manages, and supports high priority and high visibility research, development, and deployment efforts. Dr. Pease has a wide range of research interests, from developing novel image contrast agents to identify leukocyte disease for the GI tract, to exploring multi-phase and transient turbulent jet flows to improve nuclear waste processing. He has been a veteran of the Frontiers program, serving at different capacities over the past few years, and he has led the planning of the upcoming symposium on the US side along with Dr. Athani. He is also working really hard to learn Arabic by next year. So just stay tuned, and you're welcome to test him next year when you meet him. Leonard and Dina will tell you more about the upcoming meeting, what to expect, and why you should be engaged. Without further ado, off to you, Dina and Leonard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on COVID-19. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you will enjoy it as we enjoyed preparing it. So I would also like to have the pleasure to introduce the eighth Arab American Frontiers program that will be held, inshallah, in Qatar on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of November of 2021. We have an exciting program in place. The event, as I said, it will be held in Hamad bin Khalifa University campus. Next slide, please. To introduce Hamad bin Khalifa University, founded by Her Highness Sheikh Hamouza bint Nasser, Hamad bin Khalifa University is a member of Qatar Foundation, is a homegrown academic institute founded in 2010 as a research-intensive university with an aim to become a catalyst for a transformative change in Qatar and the region while having a global impact. Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar, a number of state-of-the-art postgraduate programs that aims to boost innovation in education in the region, as well as in research through solving critical and timely challenges of Qatar and the world. Next slide, please. Over the past 10 years, the university has successfully launched 6 colleges with over 35 postgraduate programs, more than 900 students from over 60 nationalities, and more than 75 faculty members. Research, of course, is an integral part of Hamad bin Khalifa University mission to help build the human capacity here in Qatar and the region, playing a crucial role in HBKU's academic programs across all its colleges. HBKU as well consists of 3 national research institutes that are at the forefront of efforts to seek novel solutions to grand challenges facing us in Qatar and in the region. They are the Qatar Biomedical Research Institute, the Qatar Computing Research Institute, and the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute. Next slide, please. HBKU reside in a very unique environment. HBKU resides in the heart of the education city, which covers over 14 million square meters and houses a number of branch campuses that are renowned to be internationally pioneering in research in their areas. Most of them are basically from the US, Together, these institutes make the Education City a very unique model of academic and research excellence, pioneering in new approaches of multidisciplinary and global education and research endeavor, and enabling breakthrough that benefits Qatar and the rest of the world. So to here, I have presented HBKU and the Education City, and I hope you will see it soon. Within a year time, I will pass to my colleague Leonard.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Thani. The program in November of 2021 will be the 8th Arab American Frontiers of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Symposium, and 2021 is also the 10th anniversary of this exciting symposium. We have a compelling lineup of cross-cutting multidisciplinary topics. Each session is led by 2 co-chairs, one from the US and one from one of the 22 participating Arab countries. Co-chairs are women and men who are experts in their field and known in their domain of expertise. Our session on advanced materials is led by Dr. Amel Al-Ghazali of Cornell University and Majid El-Rukeshi of Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. Our session on e-health will be led by Nadi El-Haj of HBKU in Qatar and Ellie Graydon of Thales Analytics in the US. Our session on water, food, and environment will be led by Tariq Al-Ansari of HBKU in Qatar and Emily Kumpel of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Our session on emerging technologies and society will be led by Dr. April Sellis of the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth in the US, and Dr. Mohamed Bakoya of the International University of Rabat in Morocco. Our session on cybersecurity will be led by Dr. Saif Al-Kouari of HBKU in Qatar and Dr. Ryan Donaghy of the National Risk Management Center in the US. Each session has selected compelling speakers, each of whom are thought leaders in their fields. The full program is available on the website. We would also like to gratefully acknowledge the guidance of the Oversight Committee of senior researchers whose role is crucial in developing and sustaining this important and exciting program. If you are a talented scientist, engineer, or medical professional and approximately 45 years of age or younger, please consider applying. The application deadline is the last day of this year, December 2020. And now, without further ado, it is our pleasure to introduce Dr. Ellie Graydon, who will moderate the remainder of this webinar on COVID-19. Dr. Graydon is the founder and CEO of Thales Analytics and an adjunct professor with the Georgetown University Center for Global Health Science and Security. She leads a research and development team that specializes in using data, modeling, and systems analysis to address challenges at the intersection of policy and global public health. Most recently, Dr. Graydon and her team have worked with the CDC to develop platforms for healthcare visibility, vaccination coverage, and response efforts for influenza and now COVID-19. In collaboration with Georgetown, she has helped lead development of a comprehensive inventory of policies implemented to mitigate COVID-19 and model the impact of those policies. Dr. Graydon earned her doctorate in biology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Graydon.
Thank you so much, Leonard. And thank you for the great kickoff, Dina and Dalal. That was terrific. So we're very much looking forward to welcoming you to the Arab American Frontiers National Academies meeting. This particular topic is on COVID-19 with a view both from the US and Arab sides. I'm very pleased to be part of this terrific effort, and we're hoping to bring some relevant information both about the current COVID-19 research and really focus on a look at what needs to be done to mitigate this pandemic as we move forward. So if we go to the next slide, we have a few housekeeping notes before we start. So all participants will be muted with only those leading the meeting on video. We'll be providing a quick introduction, and each panelist will provide a 15-minute presentation, after which we will open the discussion to questions. So as we move into the question section, please drop any comments or questions into the Q&A box on the platform. So as you'll notice here, you'll want to make sure that you direct those questions to all panelists. That's important so that we can actually all see it, including me, as we're walking through the different the conversation. If you direct it just at a single person, we are more likely to miss it. We will then address as many of the questions as we possibly can during the Q&A session, so keep them coming and drop them as early as you have them. We'll try to loop back and make sure that we capture everything. If you go down to the bottom of the screen to make sure that you can actually see where this is and drop in your notes and questions, what we're showing here is what this looks like on a mobile phone. So you can see the 3 dots down at the bottom here, and then you can click there, pull up, it will open up. You'll see this panel of options. You can click on the Q&A button, that will open, and then you can enter your questions there. Alternatively, if you're on a laptop, go to the next slide, please. If you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, what you can see here is the Q&A box there on your screen. Again, if you click there, open up, it gives you the opportunity to choose to whom you would like to direct those questions. You can click on all panelists and then enter your question there. That will, again, let us see what you're asking and help us bring it to the fore and present it to the panelists. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce our panelists. We have a really terrific group of folks here today. Dr. Saad Omer is the director of the Yale Institute for Global Health at the School of Medicine. His research portfolio includes the epidemiology of respiratory viruses, such as influenza, RSV, and most recently, obviously, COVID-19. He focuses also on clinical vaccine, specifically in the context of maternal and/or infant diseases, and trials to evaluate drug regimens to reduce mother-to-child transmission of HIV. Moreover, he's conducted several studies on interventions to increase immunization coverage and acceptance. He's served on several advisory panels, including the U.S. National Vaccine Advisory Committee, the Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic Resistance Bacteria, and the Vaccine Innovation Working Group, and the WHO Expert Advisory Group for Healthcare Worker Vaccination. Obviously, all these topics are pretty relevant right now, especially as we have the latest data coming out of the Pfizer trials in the US just this week. For this particular conversation, he'll be speaking on the consequentialist research in a pandemic, with a focus on the need for a broad-based research agenda that's responsive to the emerging needs of a fast-moving pandemic. And our second panelist is Dr. Abu Radad. Dr. Laith Abu Radad is director of the Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Mathematics Research Core, the Weill Cornell Medicine in Qatar. He is an infectious disease epidemiologist who focuses on applying quantitative methods, including mathematical modeling and biostatistics. His research work has been key in the formulation of public health policy at the regional and international levels. Findings of his research studies have received coverage in international media such as Al Jazeera, the New York Times, BBC, and The Economist. Dr. Radad's talk will be focused on applying a science-based approach to inform COVID-19 national response, with a specific look at how the pandemic has unfolded in Qatar, providing a high-level overview to highlight how a science-based approach was successful in leading to a more effective COVID-19 national level response. So our third panelist is Dr. Mark Smolinski, who's the president of Epidemics. He brings 25 years of experience in applying innovative solutions to improve disease prevention, response, and control across the globe. Since 2009, Dr. Smolinski has served as the Chief Medical Officer and Director of Global Health at the Skoll Global Threats Fund, prior to which he developed the Predict and Prevent initiative at google.org as part of the starting team at Google's philanthropic arm, where he helped lead the team developing Google Flu Trends in partnership with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Dr. Smolinski's talk will be focused on looking beyond COVID-19 with a vision for ending pandemics. His talk will introduce 5 key components of systems change to disease surveillance that will be essential, with the goal of stopping a threat anywhere from becoming a threat everywhere. So with that, I'd like to kick off the panel presentations. Saad, are you ready to go?
Absolutely.
Great. And you then.
Great. So let me share my slides. Just give me 1 second. Just got enabled. So I will share my slides. Can you see the slides? The slideshow project? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So I'll be talking about COVID-19 and a consequentialist research agenda. And before I start, just a moment to say what I mean by consequentialism in science. There are a lot of enterprises that are deontological, and universities and research institutions should absolutely not ask the question, what is the value of looking at zebrafish biology, for example, or comparative literature when you are looking at it? Because what happens is that if we don't ask those questions, we benefit as a human race from the long-term impact of it. Often the practical purpose is discovered later because it's not directly clear initially. But there's another part of a university's or a research institutions or an organization's mission, which is consequentialist, meaning that the research questions are defined by their impact and their values defined not by what fundamental problem they are solving, but how they're impacting the world. I think academic, research, and intellectual entities should do both. And in fact, they should do more of the ontological work. But when there is a pandemic, you absolutely have to have, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, the great civil rights leader, we have to work with the fierce urgency of now. And in order to do that, we have to have a consequentialist agenda where our science is driven by the need to respond to a pandemic. So what I'll do is that at the Yale Institute for Global Health and even my research group, we attempted to do that in the past 11, 12 months, 10, 11 months. And just to set the context, this is what I wrote in the New York Times on January 23rd. And at that time, it was the US had one case of what was called the novel coronavirus at that time. And I warned against a few things. The first warning was let the scientists lead. And the reason was that the pandemic, it was pretty clear from the early signs, and I'm a trained epidemiologist, so I knew that I did not know what the extent of the pandemic would be, but I knew things didn't look good. And so in order to do that, I talked about the scientific leadership of response because I knew that things will change. I did not know that there will be a debate about airborne transmission. I did not know about there would be a focus on super spreader events. But I knew that in these kinds of situations, the information changes, and the more you are close to decision making, the more you make scientists a part of decision making and in terms of leadership of that, the better it is because of this changing information. But the second thing was do not provide false assurance. This is part of scientific communication, that if you have genuine uncertainty, convey uncertainty that leads to short-term concern, but you don't lose trust. And in the long run, it pays off. And the last thing was that I pointed to an emerging saying that the misinformation will not only come from the conventional sources, it will also come from preprints. It will also come from prematurely shared science. So this was January 23rd, 2020. So how did we started asking several questions. Very earlier on, the world went into a lockdown, and it was pretty remarkable. And we wanted to say that what was the impact of these things into actually reducing mobility. And the first thing we did was we looked at two big factors. One was looking at people's planning their trips across 43 cities. The second time was using cell phone data, focusing on how much time was spent at home. And I collaborated with one of my colleagues at Yale, who's an economist at our School of Forestry. It was pretty clear looking at mobility index using this app where people plan their visits that it was going down from, so this is the left is the beginning of March and the right is the end of March in these cities. And the red dots are the one that did not institute a lockdown or social distancing measure. So we were able to say that there was, even before those measures, there was a decrease of 3.4% per day. So people were modifying their behavior more voluntarily. The second part was the decrease in mobility after social distancing policies was 23% in addition to that. So that was the first lesson. But when we looked at it more in a more nuanced way, we said on the stay-at-home time, if you look at it from that perspective using cell phone data, the policies were crowding out the voluntary behavior. And that was an interesting insight, because that impacts how you open up and how you go back. And we used cell phone data to measure that. There's more work coming out of this work, more nuanced work coming out as well. Then the next question was, very earlier on, we knew that there will be a shortage of tests. And we said that how can we optimize testing for low and middle income countries, and what would be the plan? So we, when the US was in lockdown, myself and a couple of people came out with a plan in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, to talk about extensive testing and contact. So this was March 4th, 5th, or this became mainstream, reduce household transmission, and then saying that what that would do is to have, even before a vaccine, that would give you the period to ramp up your additional treatment options so that you reduce mortality. And now you see, obviously, people haven't, followed, and policymakers haven't always followed, and for understandable reason, for economic reasons, in terms of social distancing measures long term, which they were untenable. And testing has been ramped up, but not to that extent that one would have hoped. But additional treatment options becoming available have played a role in reducing mortality and infection mortality ratios. We also worked out, can we optimize testing for SARS-CoV-2? And we were one of the earliest groups, again, collaborating with a couple of economist colleagues, to figure out that even at modest prevalences, you can have, depending on your policy goal, you can do pooled testing of your sera, and it can be optimized. So there are lab-related factors, and then there are other factors of average pool size. And we said that pool sizes, can be, depending on what pool size you're using, from 10 or 64, et cetera. As a principle, you can use that as a policy, and not a lot of, and this was before a lot of countries started using pool testing. So this was one of the initial evidence to look at this policy. The second thing is that a lot of this is happening, a lot of the outbreak is happening in closed places and in confined spaces. Earlier on, we knew that there were outbreaks in cruise ships, but we set out to look at some of those models with my colleague, with one of my postdocs, Amin Malik, and my colleague, Sam Jeunesse at Emory, looking at network models and modeling them, cruise ships as networks of passenger and networks of crew, and to understand the dynamics of what was happening, but to use that to build upon this as a model for closed space outbreak control for COVID-19. That could be dormitories, hostels in universities. It could be resorts as things start opening up. It could be all sorts of other places depending on your needs. And so we evaluated these models, and we looked at the time by various network lock time, which is, and on the x-axis is the cumulative incidence, and then on the y-axis is when you sort of lock down the networks. And whether or not, with or without PPE. And we yielded some insights from this that, if you do it really earlier on, if you never lock down your, you're going to have pretty substantial cases. But if you do it really early on, you can control this outbreak, et cetera. And PPE, et cetera, in other analyses we showed, and I'm not going to go into the details, does make a difference, but if you have it from the very beginning. And so that informs, again, cruise ships and other entities where entertainment and leisure is part of economic activity. But it also informs policies, as I said, in other situations. We also wanted to see whether there are better indicators for COVID-19 transmission. So I reached out to a colleague in our School of Engineering to see if we could do one of the very earlier on, I think it was in February, that there was early indication that viral RNA was being identified in stool. And a colleague of mine from School of Management who does mathematical modeling and I were initially trying to figure out some basic parameters of this outbreak. And one of the things was, he expressed a concern that could there be transmission happening through the orophycal route? Because, we had this kind of transmission or sort of transmission through feces, in terms of, even it's through not necessarily through oral route on the other side. And so there is evidence of other coronaviruses transmitting that way. Me being an optimist, thought it's actually an opportunity to detect viral RNA in sewage to figure out if we could map it with the outbreak. And so we were one of the first groups to not only identify, there were other groups that were identifying viral RNA. We were the ones who actually correlated this with the epidemiology of the outbreak. And actually our paper came out subsequently in Nature Biotechnology. So this is our initial analysis. And we showed that you can, depending on what parameter you're looking at, your sewage can precede or in a way predict your case increase by 4 to 6 days. Sometimes it's 2 days, but it gives you some lead time. And so right now where I exist, where I am right now, where I reside, we are, in New Haven, we are predicting a pretty substantial increase because our sewage, wastewater surveillance is signaling that. Then, vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations save lives. And so the act of acceptance is what actually saves lives, because if a vaccine, no matter how fancy it is, if it stays in a vial, doesn't get into an arm, it has zero efficacy. So the idea was to figure out in the US, and now we have replicating it elsewhere. We created this using census data and a national survey. We created this predictive model at the individual level that who's likely to accept or refuse vaccine, so that you can target them, you can micro-target them through your messages. We looked at regional differences in the US. So this is a map, and we saw that where you're going to face more opposition to the vaccine, but also at the individual level, we figured out what are some of the demographics that predict vaccine acceptance or refusal. Then one of the things was that can immune biomarkers be associated with severe disease, and could this be a first step towards a useful prognostic tool for better targeted therapy? So my research group that meets fairly regularly, weekly basis with alongside we have 2 group meetings with Akiko Iwasaki, who's an immunologist. We partnered and a lot of other colleagues here at Yale very early on March 2nd, decided to create a biorepository of patients that we were expecting. And we created the biorepository, and the clinicians and nurses and others who helped us create this is, their sacrifice and their efforts in the middle of a raging outbreak is pretty phenomenal. And so we then stratified people by severity, and we looked at the impact, and we identified various clusters and immune markers that were associated with worse progression. So this came out in July in Nature, June or July, it's all a blur. I was telling my colleagues that it feels like it's one long day that started in late January and it's still going on. And so we had a subsequent paper, again in Nature, that came out a month after this, looking at sex differences between, in terms of what the immune responses were to SARS-CoV-2 infection and their progression in the clinic. We identify the risk of death according to biomarkers, and this is left side is protective, right side is predictive of bad outcomes. And this was one of the initial studies that combined clinical information with some of the initial insights. Even the past 2-3 months since this came out, the science has advanced even more, much more than this, and we have a more nuanced understanding of what is dictating. And so looking at sort of activated T cells along with cytokines, et cetera, at one spectrum to the other, for example, IL-18, et cetera, came out to be a pretty strong predictor. And the underlying what is happening, which is now very clear, and that there is misfiring happening in these kinds of situations. And there are other nuances, et cetera, that I'm not going to go into the details of. So a few things. This was, I said that in one of my talks, and our School of Medicine decided to put it on their website, and I'll repeat that. Research institutions, academic enterprises, and universities have a very privileged position in societies. And the reason why we have privileged position, we are paid to think and pursue intellectual pursuits without a lot of questions asked. And so that brings a responsibility to us because we outlier. So I did an analysis of what is the average age of the 8 largest Fortune 500 corporations. It's barely, even after mergers, et cetera, is barely above 50 years. And the average age of, the average age of 8 Ivy League universities is close to 300 years. In terms of its longevity. So we have the responsibility. So therefore, universities and institutions have privileged positions in civilizations. We are guardians of knowledge for future generations. What we learn now through science, through experience, through policy will pass on to our students, our mentees, and future scientists. And this is all the more important for pandemics because this is a once in a century experience. The next big event like this may not happen in our lifetimes, hopefully. But the memory of what we learn from a scientific perspective, from a quantitative perspective, from a biological perspective, even from a social science perspective, has to be preserved. And what better entity to preserve that is than academic institutions. And so I leave it to you to there. And one thing you may have noticed, that part of this consequentialism is that you start with the question and you work backwards to disciplines and identify collaborators and try to address the questions rather than starting with the discipline and go out looking for a research question that is relevant to the pandemic. So I'll stop here, and I think I'm a minute and a half over my time, so I apologize for that.
Wonderful. That was terrific. Thank you so much. So moving on, Laith, are you all set?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Ellie. Just let me put it on. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion today. So this epidemic, or actually pandemic, has been, of course, very burdensome in terms of disease and mortality, as well as social and economic disruptions. However, maybe we need also to think of it as an opportunity to learn many new lessons, and probably even more importantly, as an agent for change for the future. Why is this? Because really it's a very special global challenge that we are going through right now. This pandemic is very unique because it's a very acute and very global experience and challenge. This is quite different from, let's say, global warming. Global warming is a very important challenge, but the consequences of global warming will take actually years, if not decades, to materialize. Here, however, the whole world had to confront the same challenge everywhere in very, very short time. We're talking only about a few months so far. So we can also think of this pandemic as in reality a natural experiment of how different countries, different governments have responded to it, and how effective really also is this overall global response. Such natural experiments are really not, of course, new, but this time we have a very global natural experiment. Here is another natural experiment which is more, let's say, localized. This is the case of Korea. So the Korea is one country that it was split into 2 parts, North Korea and South Korea, for political reasons. Each of these parts was governed by a different system. And so in reality, it's actually a clinical trial, so to speak, of governance. What happens when we have 2 different governing structures? Now, 60 years later, we know actually the outcome. And it's really very nicely summarized in this picture here, which is a satellite image of Korea, of the Korean Peninsula at night. What we have is a country that lives in light, South Korea. It's really bright because it's one of the world's most prosperous, most productive, and one of the countries that has highest development indices in the world. And we have North Korea, which is a country lives really truly in darkness. There is only one bright spot right here, which is actually happens to be the capital where the dictator lives. So this is a very, very quite a natural experiment how governance matters a lot. And I think this is what's happening right now. Different governance structures will result into different responses and, of course, different consequences for this pandemic. My argument today is that a science-based approach is the most effective approach to confront this as well as other global challenges. And I think how much do we rely on science will really distinguish the North Koreas from the South Koreas of today. And just to highlight this point, I would like to take an example of Qatar, which is where I am based. Because in this country has decided to go into quite heavily into the science-based approach. And I would like to show some examples in this regard. So to start with, just a very brief introduction to Qatar. So this is really a small country. It's a small peninsula in the Arabian Gulf. It has a population of 3 million people. However, almost 90% of the population come from elsewhere. These are expatriates coming to Qatar to work, because the country has been going through very rapid development drive now for 2 decades. So in reality, the vast majority of the population are working age population. We have actually very small part of the population who are above 60 years of age, only 2%, and only 9% above 50 years of age. So this means we have actually a strength, in a sense, to confront this epidemic, because we don't have the elderly population that's most susceptible to severe disease. So it's unlikely that the epidemic here will be as serious in terms of mortality and severity as other places. Of course, will be serious, but not as much. So this is the strength we have, but we do have a vulnerability here. And the vulnerability comes because really of the nature of the country being really very much right now a construction site of many, many development projects. The vulnerability comes because 60% of the population are craft and manual workers who typically live in shared accommodations. So here is a picture of one of those shared accommodations, which houses really thousands of workers together in these series of buildings. Now, such accommodations, more like really dormitories, people share rooms, they share bathrooms, they share meals, as you can see. So there are plenty of opportunities for social contacts. And such social contacts are actually a vulnerability in a time of a pandemic like this one, because we are talking about a respiratory infection that spread through such social contacts. So in fact, we know from infectious disease epidemiology, a very special effect that describes this, which is actually the boarding school effect. Because we know for influenza outbreak, they tend to be very intense in boarding schools, precisely for these reasons, lots of social contacts. So once we knew about the emergence of this infection, it was very clear that we have actually a vulnerability that we need to work on to try to confront the epidemic. And indeed, this vulnerability proved to be a very important risk factor for us, because the very first case of community transmission was actually discovered in one of those residential shared accommodations, where there was a cluster of 300 infections. And immediately after that, we entered into a 3-month lockdown. But before even the discovery of this first infection, the country was preparing itself. And this happened through lots of modeling to try to forecast what kind of healthcare needs do we need, and also what are the consequences of different social and physical distancing restrictions, lockdowns, and so on. All of this really was done through modeling. So here are just some of the very first, in fact, examples, which when we started working all of this, It's just predicting how many hospital beds do we need, whether for acute care or for ICU as well. So this started again before even the epidemic started, and eventually it proved to be quite very useful, because what eventually happened wasn't far from these modeling projections, and this allowed us to prepare very well. Unfortunately for us, at no time we were even close to the health system threshold. So we were able to deal with all the epidemic, even at the very epidemic peak, with no really issues, and everything went fortunately smoothly for us. So forecasting healthcare needs was very important, and we confronted it really just using science. But another need, which we also we were very worried about, in fact, from the beginning, is actually isolation. And this need was very specific really to Qatar. The reason for this, because we cannot really go with home quarantine or home isolation, because we do not want to expose any other workers to the infection. So because there are many people living in these residential housings. So we had to work in predicting what kind of isolation facilities needs that we need. And also this was done through modeling. And it worked out very well, because we were also able to prepare in advance for the kind of needs that we need to isolate very, very large number of people potentially because of this epidemic. Many countries went through debate about what could be really the best approach in confronting this epidemic. Here, there wasn't really much debate. We knew from the very beginning, we only had one option, which really tried to suppress the epidemic as much as possible and to flatten the curve. And this is why we went immediately into a lockdown right after the discovery of the first cluster. And it worked out to be really a very successful strategy, because we were able to flatten the epidemic curve by more than 75%. So our needs for hospitalization were actually were reduced by more than 75%, which allowed, of course, the health system to cope smoothly with the demand. Science was always part of also tracking the epidemic and analyzing it. So, for example, weeks before the epidemic peak, we knew when the epidemic peak is likely to happen, and it worked, in fact, exactly as the model predicted. This allowed us also to prepare ourselves better. These days, for example, science is being used to track the evolution of the epidemic. This is the effective reproduction number, which is basically the temperature of the epidemic. It will tell us whether we are going into another wave. And so far, it's really showing us there is no immediate second wave coming. So these are examples of some of this science-based approach, but probably the most consequential was actually in timing and manner of easing of restrictions. So in the first couple of weeks after the lockdown, or during the lockdown, first 2 weeks, there was very clear consensus among policymakers. We need to do the lockdown because we have vulnerability and we have to confront the epidemic. But very quickly after that, it was becoming evident that the lockdown is causing lots of problems. I mean, this is a country of lots of development projects. It has very thriving economy. So there were many, many consequences, and the epidemic could not have happened in a war time for us. So there was very serious discussion that we should start easing at least some of these restrictions. It did not help also at the time. There was strong pressure even externally to ease restrictions. Europe was easing, in Europe, the countries were easing their restrictions. Our neighbors here were easing their restrictions. This all created more pressure on us. Why don't we do also the same? So similarly here also, modeling was used to investigate the consequences of potential easing of restrictions. Here are some examples, as you can see. So it was very easy really for the model to show easing restrictions during the exponential growth phase of the epidemic is a very bad decision, because it will amplify the epidemic. In fact, the epidemic peak will double. Even if we wait for 2 more weeks, we will have a similar situation, even though the epidemic is less, and similarly if it is 2 weeks later. So really, it wasn't really the time to ease restrictions. So timing of easing of restriction is very, very critical. This was really the simple message coming from the modeling. It's all really about the right time. And indeed, eventually policymakers agreed that really we should let the model decide what time exactly we should ease the restrictions. And specifically, policymakers wanted us to look into scenarios where we can ease restrictions in such a way we minimize the second wave as the likelihood of a second wave as much as possible, because they wanted stability. They did not want to ease restrictions only to have a second wave coming shortly after. They also did not want the concept of intermittent application of restrictions, because this would be also damaging to the country's development projects and so on. So we wanted stability. And the answer came from the model that if we ease restrictions 3 weeks after the epidemic peak, which actually was June 15, we would have achieved these goals, minimize second wave, and allow some stability for at least a long while. And this is what actually happened. So we started easing of restrictions from June 15, and it worked out to be a very successful strategy. So here is actually how our epidemic evolved throughout since the beginning. So as you can see, since the epidemic peak, the epidemic continues to decline. We never had to confront a second wave so far because we really waited. We were patient enough to ease restrictions in the right time. So far, even the risk of a second wave is there, but is actually right now low. So this just very simple application of science allowed us to have stability and functionality. Most of the restrictions, by the way, now has already been eased here in Qatar. So we have been enjoying now almost over actually 5 months of easing of restrictions and enjoying the benefits of it. So these are some examples of how science was really part of the national response. But the country also invested in conduct of epidemiologic studies to really understand things about the infection and also, of course, to support the national response. I just want to show one example of this, which is the issue of reinfection. So one of the studies that were done is to assess really what's the likelihood of people getting reinfected. And really what facilitated this study is that we have excellent centralized databases of everything related to COVID-19. So it wasn't actually difficult to conduct such a study. And through this investigation, it was very clear there are indeed reinfections. In fact, managed to confirm 4 cases of reinfections very clearly. The 2 viruses were different. These are 2 different viruses, so for sure these persons got reinfected. But the more important really consequence of the study is assessing what is the risk of reinfection, how much it is. And it turned out it's actually very, very small risk. It's less than 2 in 10,000 cases. And all reinfections were actually mild. None of them was really serious. So this shows that it looks like people do develop immunity and quite strong immunity against reinfection that lasts for at least a few months. So this study, it was really an investment in the country in science, but actually its impact was also global because it really it's the first study to actually calculate the risk of reinfection. And here is an example of its impact. So recently the CDC adjusted their guidelines regarding to quarantine. And one of the reasons for this adjustment was actually the findings of this study. So it shows even for a small country like Qatar, when it invested in science, it actually benefited also everyone as well. So the country has had a science-based approach, but also another aspect of the response is being really very practical and pragmatic. Here is just want to show one example. This is what's known as an Ihtiraz app. It's an app that every person in the country must have in their phones. Otherwise, they cannot do even basic stuff like going to a supermarket. The app allowed us to administer and enforce isolation and quarantine effectively. It also allowed us to disseminate accurate information about the epidemic and to counter what was going on in social media as elsewhere. But I think also indirectly, the app really created a sense of social responsibility in the country, and that everyone, even in small measure, they are actually part of the national response. So created also ownership of the response in the whole country. So in conclusion, I think this pandemic really has demonstrated that global challenges need to be confronted with global solutions. And in my view, science really is the natural platform of such global unity and global solutions, and really our best approach to solve problems fundamentally. And earlier this week, we saw actually one example to this, which is the great news about the vaccine. So now we can see light at the end of the tunnel. We can see the prospects of going back to normality. And this is really thanks to investment in science of a vaccine to be able to have this intervention. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Laith, thank you so much for a great talk. Mark, you're up next. You ready?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. And let me pull up my PowerPoint slide here and see if I can pull this off. It looks like it pulled it up, but started at the bottom for some reason. Hang on. Here's a quick preview of everything you're going to learn in the next 15 minutes. Okay. Are we at the beginning?
Looks like it.
Okay, great. So again, thank you. And it's a privilege to be here with the other two very distinguished speakers, of whom I was enjoying that update very much, and lamenting the fact that we won't be anywhere near your activity anytime soon in the United States, I fear. But we'll try to take those great lessons learned from this and apply them here. So our organization has been focused on, as our name implies, our vision and our mission is also our name. And we've been working for the last decade as this organization, but under the auspices of the Skoll Global Threats Fund, which was started by Jeff Skoll, the first president of eBay. And we focus on 5 global threats: pandemics, water security, nuclear nonproliferation, Middle East conflict, and climate change. And we invested $100 million over 5 years to see if we could make progress in one or more of those global threats. And I'm happy to say we made progress in quite a few. But in 2018, we were spun off as Ending Pandemics to be an independent organization focused on a single threat. As you can see from the previous presentations, is complex in and of itself without trying to solve 4 other threats to humanity. So we tackle this approach through planetary hotspots for disease emergence, and we partnered with EcoHealth Alliance many years ago to create this hotspot map. You've probably seen it in several publications. And this really represents where we know diseases are likely to emerge. Now, obviously, you can see from COVID, once a disease emerges, the planet is at risk. So this is not representative necessarily of where disease would spread, but this is where disease emerges on the planet. And this is where we prioritize our work in helping countries get better about finding outbreaks faster in these particular areas. And then probably equally important is where you look is how you work. And as you can see, even from the previous presentations on COVID, we all keep looking at this epicurve of humans. But in reality, 3 out of every 4 diseases that cause epidemics or pandemics jump from animals to humans, including COVID. So when are we going to start to think about, like, this is what we need to be doing if we're thinking about ending pandemics and stopping epidemics, is we have to really look at surveillance across species. And even more so than that is the reality that ecosystem changes and all these variables in both the social, physical, and even political environments really have an impact on both those animal and human curves. So the One Health approach is what we take in all of our work to really focus on the fact that diseases are emerging, and this is the way we need to be finding them faster, is to not only look at the human health lens, but integrate it with the animal and then within the environment. Because I noticed one of our previous speakers, and I've heard this comment so many times about COVID-19, that this is a once in a century pandemic. But I would argue that that's not true. HIV is still a pandemic with 75 million people infected and over 30 million people dead, and it's ongoing. So I think what we've done is we've taken our understanding of influenza, which was really where the term pandemic took a foothold in the global health space, and used all of those examples. And even early on with COVID, everything was compared to flu. Instead of looking at COVID as a zoonotic diseases like HIV was, like many other diseases are. And when we start to look at that lens, these are not once in a century events. In fact, yesterday on a phone call with the World Health Organization, looking at re-engaging with some of our work now that they're taking a little bit of a breath from being heads down, completely focused on COVID, they've responded to 60 global health emergencies during COVID in 2020. So even COVID is not the only thing, obviously, that's taking our expanse. So as was mentioned in my introduction, and thank you much for that very kind introduction, we look at 5 different integrated but fundamental components in our vision for ending pandemics. And these are, and I'll go through each of these with quick examples, are to engage directly with the public, to deploy this One Health model, to expand epidemic intelligence, to collaborate with neighboring countries, and then last but not least is to measure progress, which is a real challenge when you're focused on prevention, but we have figured out a way to really help us monitor progress, even in the absence of epidemics, which is our goal. So in looking at that hotspot map, one of our key areas in directly engaging the public is focusing on participatory surveillance. So back when we started the Skoll Global Threats Fund, and I had just left Google, where we had done the Google flu trends several years earlier, but that was an interesting opportunity to look at a private sector approach to see if they could add value to public health. And it was a huge effort. It took us 2 years to build Google Flu Trends because instead of trying to figure out what we thought people might be searching on and is it related to flu, the engineers actually looked at every single keystroke that ever went through Google search in an aggregated format and then added terms that matched the signal that's we have a flu season, then not a flu season here in the United States. And so they were able to then add up the 45 terms that didn't change that curve. And that's what built Google Flu Trends, which inspired lots of big data analysis and signals around the world. For us, when we moved over to Skoll Global Threats Fund, we were looking, what more could we be doing? While Google Flu Trends was interesting in that it found potentially earlier outbreaks of flu, it really didn't connect to allow us to provide any action because it was all anonymized aggregated data. So we built Flu Near You in 2011 and launched it with the American Public Health Association to really test the idea, well, if we can see people are going to the internet and searching things and that could give us early signals, why aren't we just asking people, can they report the simple 10 symptoms of illness every week, or whether they were healthy the week before, and we start mapping out, real symptoms of illness, and then look at that overlaid with the CDC reported data, and most importantly, be able to provide really useful information to the public, like where you can get a flu shot, other information about flu, and so forth. That now has been sort of revamped into COVID Near You, a sister tool that has been launched to add some new dimensions and try some other technologies, since Flu Near You had been operating for almost a decade now. And what we've learned with COVID Near You, we're merging with our Flu Near You, and we'll launch a single tool and still working with the US CDC as really an opportunity to get a population-based surveillance system that's outside of the government, which has its advantages in many senses as long as the government is the partner, which is our goal in all of these other systems. We really built Flu Near You because we wanted to bring participatory surveillance as a hypothesis that if we engage communities to be the eyes and ears to tell us something's not right, and then be able to communicate early with them, that could help us think about really finding outbreaks at their source much faster. So these other buttons represent different systems, and I'm going to go through a couple of these that really take us from that approach once we proved that it was reliable and people would maintain themselves in a system, even with, the only incentive being good information. We don't pay people to be in Flu Near You. It's completely voluntary. And so that showed us that it was worthwhile to try in these other systems. I just want to point out before I move into specific systems to the far right, where you can see in Brazil, that little blue shield with the plus sign. We were approached by the Ministry of Health in Brazil just before they were going to host the World Cup in 2014 and said, hey, we've been watching your Flu Near You. Have you ever thought about doing self-reported surveillance during an international gathering or a mass gathering over a short period of time? And we're like, no, but that's really interesting. And I'm giving this example because, of course, the Hajj in Saudi Arabia has always been on my radar screen. And I've talked to Dr. Memish many times over the years about that approach. And so that was not only successful being the first application of participatory surveillance using mobile phones for the World Cup. It was replicated 2 years later for the Olympics and the Paralympics, and actually continues to this day as Guardians of Health in Brazil and is impacting on the COVID. The other ones to the far right are where we really took this concept of self-reported, but moved it into those populations of farmers and market workers and community village volunteers to really move it into the One Health spectrum and begin to get animal health reported along with human health. So just two examples I want to share in Cambodia. And what's interesting for this group here, since you are the science and engineering and medicine group, is our approach is to bring scientists and engineers together in each of the countries. So we have created this 1 week process called an EpiHack, where the human health, the animal health, and the environmental health people come together in a 3-to-1 ratio with 3 developers to every 1 health expert. And we find all of those developers from that country in the private sector, in the public sector, along with a few key international developers. And we host this process in the country where they take the developers into the field, explain what they want to do, explain, the technology exists, and then they hack away for the week. And at the end, we fund the most promising approaches that really solve the problems as identified by the health authorities in that country. So in Cambodia, the challenge was they wanted a technology that would be available to every single person living in the country. At the time, it was 14 million when we built this. And technology is pervasive in Cambodia, yet literacy is not. So the end result, and this is where it's great with philanthropy, can bring in other partners to be part of a process, because we can often broker relationships with the private sector and governments that it's hard for governments to negotiate on their own. So this system is a free national hotline with all 4 telecom companies participating in kind. So it doesn't matter what your provider is or what phone you have, you can call from a touch tone phone and do a voice automated or touch tone keypad campaign. You can leave a voice message that will then get returned, or you can use a sophisticated mobile app or the web-based system. And this has been operating now for a few years, gets about 600 phone calls a day, of 20 to 30 of which are true public health events, either in the animal health or the human health, that need a response. When COVID occurred, and this is the value of investing in these kinds of systems, and I loved how the last speaker talked about the practical and pragmatic approach and the social responsibility, which is really what we're doing, is empowering communities to be able to say something. And then they're responded to immediately, which is why this hotline has taken such an effect in Cambodia. but now they're receiving up to 18,000 calls a day during COVID, and 90% of the cases identified and tracked in Cambodia came through the hotline. Now, I'm not saying that this is the reason why, but Cambodia has only 301 cases of COVID and not a single death. But this really exemplifies how you can build technology to help with everyday disease surveillance and then scale it up during an emergency versus what we're seeing right now, a lot of new tools developed during the emergency, which is great, but it's harder to get that buy-in, and then how do you keep them in that long term? So I think we're learning a lot from both, and we're excited to see this grow across the globe. Our longest running project is in Cambodia or in Thailand, where we really took the concept of One Health and said, how do you do One Health every day? And this was an opportunity where volunteers are reporting through a mobile phone that was developed by Chiang Mai Veterinary School and works with both the human health sector and the animal health sector to have an immediate response. And this today now is really making a huge difference in Thailand. It's been expanded on its own through resources in the country once this was demonstrated to be effective. And, you know, a single case of foot and mouth disease was reported in a rural area of Cambodia or of Thailand where the cows graze together. And they have never done vaccination or even corralled their cattle before because they freely graze into the hillsides. But when the first case through this app was identified of foot and mouth disease, they actually vaccinated all the cattle for the first time. And that single act has saved $4 million because that village would have been banned from exporting their milk for an extended period of time. So this is where we're seeing once communities are empowered, they can take it beyond disease surveillance and have real impact. So just to touch on a few of the other issues is, you know, once we talk about engaging the public directly in a One Health approach, we know that we need to improve epidemic intelligence because even the Google flu trends and the automated systems around the world are creating signals that need to be verified to say, yes, this is a real outbreak, or no, that was some sort of rumor. So we built EpiCore as a collaboration between TEFINet, knowing that that's the future epidemiologists of the globe's training, and ProMed Mail and HealthMap, which are longstanding automated systems, and built EpiCore, which now has over 2,500 volunteers in 154 countries, that when a signal comes through one of these automated systems, it now goes if you're within a geographical area, and you can now validate that. So for example, when the first report came out of what was going on in Wuhan, through the Hong Kong Ministry of Health, it went out through the EpiCore group that was within that area you could see shaded in the map, and they were able to confirm that, you know, the live animal market was not just a fish market. It sold all kinds of different animals, and then they confirmed, you know, when the pathogen was identified, and it just gives ground truthing that may be ahead of some of the official systems, only to help even identify what's real, what's not, that can help the official systems. And we're just working now as governments are saying, can we be sending things directly into EpiCore? And we're in talks with the World Health Organization about integrating it into their epidemic intelligence for open source, which is the big effort that combines these automated systems. So that's to help with epidemic intelligence. Quickly, collaborating with neighbors is really important. We work with these regional networks across the globe. The one shaded in teal there in South Asia is the newest one that's just being created. I helped create the one in 2003 in the Middle East between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. And all of these NIDUSs, you know, are working with countries that are contiguous countries and borders with the hopes that they can continue to expand beyond. And these are informal relationships, so when a crisis occurs, people trust each other and know who to call to reach across borders. And so then lastly, and this is very detailed, but you know, there's publications on this now, we were looking for a way to measure progress even in the absence of disease. And so we came up with a really simple set of metrics when we started asking countries, how long does it take you to find an outbreak? How long for laboratory confirmation? And quite frankly, many of them would say, we don't know. And it's not because they don't have the ability to know that, but there's so many public health crises that go on a day-to-day basis in these hotspot regions that taking the time to really analyze one outbreak when you move on to the next is a luxury that many have not taken and looks really complicated. So we've now vetted this set in 2 international meetings, expanded it from just human health outbreaks to animal health breaks, and now have even included a few milestones we could get more into prediction and prevention. And so we hope these will help countries not necessarily have scores to compare to neighbors, but something to benchmark and then measure progress themselves. And in countries that we are working in, we're making sure that these a handful of metrics are built right into their event management systems and other surveillance tools, so these variables are just spit out automatically and they can follow them in real time. So in summary, in these hotspot maps, we're approaching several dozen countries where we've taken these 5 approaches and really documenting the change that it's making, so that our goal is within the next 10 years, we really envision a world where outbreaks are predicted, prevented, or detected faster through this One Health approach. Countries are working seamlessly across borders. We're verifying signals within 24 to 48 hours, which EpiCore is already reaching that with a mean of 6 hours for those outbreaks that go through that system. And the best part about the philanthropic dollars that we're applying now is we know that lives are saved and livelihoods are being protected each and every day. And that what we do can help us when a pandemic does occur, and there'll be many of those, opportunities in the future. But we hope that we really can keep local threats local and prevent global spread. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I apologize for going a couple of minutes over.
That was terrific. Thank you so much, Mark. So for audience, please, by all means, drop any questions, comments, or notes into the Q&A section on your screens. But I will take the opportunity, since there aren't any yet. I have all kinds of questions for you. This really got me going. All 3 talks were just terrific. The thing that really struck me as you were all describing the work that you've been doing, particularly in the context of COVID, is the degree to which you're leaning on all of the work that's been done prior, and really these integrative approaches from a very wide range of data, whether it's starting to look at sewer systems or whether it's starting to look at exactly what types of markets we're seeing the One Health spread and the zoonotic spread. What I'm wondering really as we draw across and as you're thinking about the questions you're asking now and your own approach to this research agenda is, what were the surprises? What are you seeing from the work that we've all been doing? And I said I loved your description of one very long day since February. That very much described my experience as well. But sort of pulling all of this now and having this moment to take a step back and think, okay, well, how are we going to apply this to the next set of questions? What are the surprises in what you've learned? What are the surprises in what you have seen has been most effective in the terms of a consequentialist research agenda? And how are you already starting to think about applying that moving forward?
So there have been several. So I can let others respond first, or I don't know if it was addressed towards me or yeah.
To all 3 of you, so I think it's a relevant question certainly for what all of you are doing.
Yeah, so those of us who have been involved with this work, so my first engagement with the large, most of my portfolio has focused on infectious respiratory pathogens, both for seasonal and those with pandemic potential. But for public health preparedness, my first engagement was around smallpox threat in early 2000s, then H5N1 actually, when that was a concern, but from a very focused perspective, and then H1N1, etc. One of the things that a lot of us, and I would love to hear Mark's thoughts on that and others' thoughts on this specifically, looking at the US cases, for example, and that applies more broadly then, what wasn't a surprise that we would be hit by so many cases? There was always a possibility. But what was a surprise that the underlying assumption, at least the implicit understanding, was that if the US was hit this hard, there will be 40 other countries that would be hit worse. So that was a surprise. In retrospect, there is an explanation to that. I'll come back to it. And the explanation, or come to it next, actually, that the technologies have been there to respond to this outbreak. It's good old PCR or lateral flow assays for testing or surveillance, and so on and so forth. It's the failure of leadership. It's the failure of management. It's the failure of operations. It's not even a failure of strategy. Whenever there is a country or a region has had even a half-baked strategy, it has kind of worked. There are multiple flavors of strategies that have worked. It's the operations where we have failed. So that's the bad surprise that came. The good surprise, the pleasant surprise, was that in the US and beyond, in many countries, there was investment starting in 2005, 2006 on looking at pandemics and these kinds of events. And I agree with Mark. Mark, you're right. There are other pandemics as well. My implication was that this kind of impact in short term with that broad societal impact is rare, but absolutely, we are in the middle of one pandemic, and what has happened now is no predictor. We have had 3 large consequential coronavirus outbreaks in just 1 century, like in the first 20 years of this century, and so on and so forth. Just one kind of pathogen, etc. So going forward, I think it's extremely important to be prepared and have initiatives that are forward-looking. But the thing is, the pleasant surprise was the things, especially from the vaccine side of the world and others, that were invested in, for example, platform technologies. So saying that we will focus on vectors, we will focus on mRNA technologies so that vaccines can be developed and deployed earlier on. We will pay attention to supply chains so that if we need to ramp up production quickly, and I hope things stay okay. So far, the bottlenecks are some others. There are a lot of bottlenecks, but supply chain for ingredients, etc., and that kind of stuff is less of a concern. That's been a surprise, a pleasant surprise. Switching to a bad surprise is that from a policy discourse, we have assumed, policymakers have assumed that human behavior doesn't matter. We have assumed that the US has invested $10 to $12 billion on vaccine development, but $0 on vaccine communications campaigns, etc. We never had in most countries, have half-baked, leader-driven communication through press conference, not a public health campaign to have people, bring people on board in terms of preventive behavior and so on and so forth. And we are sort of sleepwalking into that as a world for vaccines and so on and so forth. So these are a few things, positive and negative surprises.
Yeah, and since I want to really, if I might go next, only because I really want to echo your comment about human behavior. I sat through so many interesting conversations, one including just before this administration changed and Obama was still in the White House. I went to a White House meeting that was exploring the concept of building a national disease forecasting center. And the analogy was like, we have national weather forecasting centers, and NOAA was there and, all the different groups. And it was fascinating. And I said at that meeting, I said, that's really great. But, all those variables that you're monitoring for weather, yes, they're somewhat unpredictable and they can change and so forth. But we have human behavior when it comes to an epidemic. And I'm not sure that variable can be tamed enough to think you can actually have a disease forecasting center. But I know we're making a lot of progress in the other elements of it. But that, to me, when I talk about the big surprises, I guess I'm surprised. I'm super disappointed. But I never thought we'd be in a situation where, I wrote a blog post, for Forbes that said wearing a mask is a sign of mutual respect. This was before we even had the data to show that you probably also now are protecting yourself. But the fact that we couldn't rely on people to have a human behavior change that we know is why we're seeing other countries. I mean, I'm joking about the hotline in Cambodia. I mean, what we're seeing in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and others, because they wore masks from day one. And that I think is going to pan out to really show probably, one of the greatest impacts on this potential thing. So that was a surprise to me in some sense, is like, to see human behavior play out in the United States in a way that, re-emphasized for me how complicated that makes it for the forecasting and so forth. But the other factor that I've seen in other diseases in other countries that to me shocks me in the US is that we're seeing how political will is such a key point. And to think that, we allowed it to really overcome our main, science organization, CDC, where they weren't out there every single day talking about this pandemic. A former CDC employee, epidemic intelligence officer, my heart broke for all the good people I know who are working for that organization who their heads must be exploding. So I'm excited to see that, that will change, but that was a big surprise. On a positive thing, really, in looking at the kind of work that we've been doing, I mean, you don't hear this very often, but sitting down with Lisa Bond, who's the head of disease control in Cambodia, so the equivalent of, the head of the CDC here in the US, we sat down one time after we had been working in Cambodia for several years, and he said, you know what, Mark? You have been amazing. You have helped us find outbreaks faster. We're doing great. We know everything going on. Now we have a new problem. I don't really have the capacity to make sure I can verify that, all of these different signals and so forth coming in, are real. And, it takes money to put gas in the car and send 2 people out to the other side of the country and those kinds of things. He said, could we create some kind of verification fund so we could have like immediate money to go respond? And then if it becomes a real outbreak and so forth, I have budget line items. I could take that out, or I could get it from WHO and others. And so we created a verification fund in Cambodia this past year, which has been fascinating to see. We're just getting the reports about like the first 8 outbreaks they use that for. And then the idea is that it will be replenished. And again, we're also exploring the fact that like, obviously it was a small outbreak. It's philanthropic dollars. We're like, that's okay. It's good use of our money. That may also be another opportunity for public-private partnerships to think about the corporations in that country, and could they contribute the $1,000 back that they had to take out of this fund to do some local outbreak, which is relevant to their health of their employees in that country. And so lastly, I think the other real big surprise for me in our work is people want to be part of a solution. And, more and more when we see these self-reporting, community-based systems where people are doing it because it's the right thing to do, they're getting connected to people through it, and that's enough of an incentive. And that to me is really exciting about what's possible to do in the future. Over.
That's great. Yeah. Laith, do you have something you want to speak to there too? Because I would love to hear your thoughts on Qatar. And I will just forward a question that just popped up in the chat, which I think dovetails nicely here, which is sort of as we're applying this and seeing what we've learned here, especially if we get even worse, certainly in the US, we're seeing this huge uptick. Are there additional or new adaptation measures that we should be considering incorporating? And what have you seen in terms of what you think would be most effective moving forward, sort of regardless of what the trajectory is, both on the research side and on the sort of response operations side?
Great, yeah. No, thank you. So in terms of surprises, it's always learning the epidemiology of a new infection carries lots of surprises and really very exciting surprises. So definitely this was the case here. For example, severity of the infection here has been much less than what we have seen elsewhere, which is something we're still, in fact, trying to understand. So it's a nice and positive surprise. But in terms of the experience with the epidemic here, I think really for me, one very positive surprise is actually the return on the investment on science that happened here. So my colleague Dana actually was talking about Education City. We have here an oasis of science and technology where there was real investment on science. And when the epidemic came, it actually everything came into action. So I was very pleasantly surprised to know that I have so many colleagues working on things that we can work together. So I've just shown you very small, really snapshot of the work that has been done. But lots of exciting things actually were actually done. So it's really this kind of investment that happened for only 10 years. It's actually coming to fruit so effectively. Now, in terms of really response to the US, is difficult really to come up with something unless we really look at things, in detail. But in my, at least drawing in what I've seen, a quick action. We went into an immediate lockdown, and we did not ease the lockdown until actually it was time to do it. I think this may have been a challenge in the US.
That certainly sounds right. It certainly matches with experience here. I think your point, and I love seeing the analysis done on the relative importance of the timing, and that's something that we've been looking at a lot as well. Is just sort of thinking about what the lag is and how you incorporate that into then your response decisions. So I know we are actually now at time. I want to make sure I give Dalal a few moments to close us out, but thank you all so much. This was just terrific. I really appreciate you taking the time and the conversation and all of the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And I just want to second what Ellie just said and thank our panelists, Dr. Saad Omer, Dr. Leta Bouradad, and Dr. Mark Smolinski for excellent presentations. And thank you very much, Ellie, Dina, Leonard, and the rest of the organizing committee members for your hard work on putting this together. I hope that this inspires our audience to pursue collaborations in this area. I know that many are actually tuning in from the Arab region and the US. And I'll take this opportunity also to thank the communication team from HBKU, which has been helping us put this together, and particularly as the Dean, Ben Abdel Nabi, who's in the background, and Daniel Placht. Finally, I want to remind you that the call for application is open. Still open until the end of this year, December 31st, 2020, to participate in the 10th anniversary of the Arab American Frontier Symposium, which will be held in Qatar next year, November 1st to 3rd, 2021. So you can just click on the website that is shown in this slide, and the application is very straightforward. It's an exciting, invigorating meeting, and I hope to see many of you there. Again, thank you very much to all of you, and be safe, be well, and hopefully see you soon in person. Have a good day or good evening. Bye.